Use the points. On the soil lab, they're called post-lab questions. On the salinization lab, they're called the data analysis questions. It's just a couple questions at the end of each lab, and that has the same value as the pre-labs. Remember that there just aren't a lot of classwork points. Some of you have seen what happens if you don't do the warm-ups, for example. That'll bring you down like 20% by the semester. That's pretty severe. This is probably the single assignments that lower student grades the most. If you blow off a couple homework assignments, there's like 60 of those. But if you blow off a couple of labs, that's like 2 or 3% of your grade. If you blow off all the labs, that's like 20% of your grade. Yeah. You can even do it on the back of that paper, as long as it's really obvious. And my suggestion is always start a new assignment at the top of the paper so the stamp is visible. Some kids will go like pre-lab and then start the post at the bottom, and when you get it stamped, my aides might not know to look at the bottom of the paper, you know what I'm saying? So, in the soil lab, there are just a couple of post-lab questions. We already talked about the soil composition stuff. And did we talk about percentage water retained with the graph? Anybody want to ask me anything about that? That's procedure step number 2 on part 2 of the soil lab. We'll be looking for that as part of your post lab. No questions? Then in your soil salinization lab, we got to figure out what percentage sprouted at which salinities. Remember that you put in 10 seeds per Petri dish. So if 4 of them sprout, that's a pretty easy 4 out of 10 is 40%. If 9 of them sprout, it's 90%. And you'll need to record for each of your salinities what percentage sprouted. I'm only going to give you a couple of minutes because I really want to talk about notes today. So listen carefully. You'll throw away all the tape, all the paper towel, and all the sprouts, but you're going to put all the Petri dishes in the bucket of soap water that I will top off while you're taking your data. You should know that these are edible species, but these individuals you should not eat. Most of your seed sprouts will be moldy or otherwise funky. So don't say I didn't warn you. But don't eat them. It's going to smell really bad. So you want to do this quickly, record the data, throw away all the rubbish, put all the Petri dishes in the bucket of soap water outside the door, and take a couple of seconds to go wash your hands in the bathroom if you're worried about the smell. We only have a few minutes for this. We have other important stuff to do today. So let's call it 7 minutes maximum. Anybody have any questions for me? I saw a hand that I waved off a minute ago. No questions? Everybody's ready? Okay, everybody point and laugh at Sarah, and then go ahead and hurry up. Go.
What smells so bad? Wait, what percentage water?
This is the most salty.
It's like
0 out of 10.
0.5.
If you're not sure what gets turned in, ask for the friends first. And if they still don't know, come see me at lunch today. And I can write down
Yeah. 2.5.
Yeah.
What do we do for the post-op?
Yeah, wait, how can you have to get yeah.
Okay, 2.5.
0%. What percentage salt water is that?
You just say sprout.
2.5. What is that?
2.5 milliliters? Or is that
No! You just say sprout. How do we know?
Yes.
Oh, wait. I didn't tell you a very important distinction. I'm so sorry. I get confused sometimes. I'm not as smart as I look. Which is really unfortunate. Okay, check this out. I'll clarify. This will help all of you, I swear, but I'm only going to explain it once. I apologize, but now it's on you. Watch. If the root is shorter than the seed, it's not sprouted. If the root is longer than the seed, you count it as a sprout. Keep in mind that all seeds are like a sponge. They absorb water and crack the shell. So we only call it sprouted if the root is longer than the seed. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
You're down to 2 minutes. Hurry it up. You gotta watch your hands too.
40%.
Oh, dude, we're sprouted.
Yes. Not really, but I don't think so. That's exactly the problem. Like, I'll take one, you know, like, so yeah, let me recycle the duplicates. Put 2 of them
5%.
in the box in the magazine shelves, and 1 of each on my desk.
5% salt water, 3 milliliters.
Yeah, there's a few issues with the second one. I got a email about it. So the whole box has other issues down below.
Okay.
Wait, sorry.
So I want 1 of each issue on my desk and 2 in the box and a change in the recycling bag. There's at least a few different issues in there. What's up, homie? Oh yeah, because remember the root is on the root. Yep.
9 out of 10 or longer. One of them is finished. Yeah. Wow, that was a definite distinction there, guys. This one's going more.
Wait, what is
Yeah.
Oh, dang.
I think that the post-lab questions apply to both actually.
Do we need a graph for this one?
Okay.
We need a graph for this one.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Graph it. Is that part of the pre-lab?
It's distilled water though, but it has nothing in it.
How do you graph it?
Yeah, bro.
When you say
This guy is
you go from 0
When the root is longer than the full length of the seed.
Okay.
Nice one. How clean. See, this one's all dry.
It's very possible.
So that's all they got.
Those look numb.
Well, you're having fun. Just take two.
Yeah, kind of them.
Let's go, babe.
So now we just throw everything away.
Yeah, we got some more.
Is that it?
Yeah, these are these.
Look at all the phones.
You just need to get free dishes. Yeah. Yeah, but you gotta throw this stuff away. You already touched it. Your hand's already
Have you added to the last time?
Jose, we're just tossing outside.
Hold on.
We're just tossing outside.
Trash can. Use the trash can for all your garbage and the buckets for all your dishes.
I got your tab. Is that part of it?
Hey, with the show, because I have like the second show, we go in and out every day. And I did it.
But you haven't done that in 2 days.
You got and 1.75.
Hey kids, I'm gonna get my water for the bucket. You can follow me if you want. Hey students, does anybody here speak Mexican dialect or Mesoamerican dialect Spanish? Do you know what canijo means?
Like amazing, like astounding. Did they say it about a person or?
Yes, estos canijos. Talking about kids.
Yeah, someone messing around.
Kind of like that, but it's like they mess around, they like troublemakers kind of.
Yeah.
Troublemakers, like
Why?
hecklers. What? Everyone's looking at you and it's making you uncomfortable? Sorry, you're like a token Spanish speaker for the moment. But I'm,
It's like troublemakers, like a kind of rowdy.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was used. So that's what I would have guessed. And that's also how you would use it?
Did someone say that about your kids?
No, but a colleague said that about students.
Jose, is this a line draft or is it a bar?
And is it a malicious term? Like,
No.
so you could say that about your children, and it's not bad. You could say that about. Okay. Okay, we gotta get going. Anybody know where the other students are? Hey, yell at the kids, but they gotta come back.
Are you serious?
Cover your mouth. Disgusting human being. What's the issue about me to yell at people? Come on.
You have the cleanest lunch. This is like
More day on that.
Jose, have you had problems with kids eating those before?
People dare each other and stuff, and I don't really care. It's just that it's not.
Eat those disgusting moldy like beans.
Exactly.
the fresh ones, the ones that had like clear water didn't really seem like they were moldy by any.
99 times out of 100, I'm sure it's fine to eat. It's just that.
About one shot.
That exactly, like it, you know, funk is funk, and so if somebody had some funk on their hands and they were packing that up, then in that environment with the water and the carbon and the darkness, you can get some pretty funky molds, and some of those could be bad, and there's just no way to control against it. That's exactly how you sprout seeds for food.
Yeah.
With any bit of water and stuff, you just have to be in a sterile medium. This is non-sterile, opposite.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
That's,
I have to clarify something, and then you need to scramble to take notes. Don't say I didn't warn you. We're on 4.2. This table was supposed to help you organize your study goals. This table is not supposed to be your primary source of notes. That's still your study goals. But this unit is sort of a scattershot of content. And so, to help you make sense of all the different ingredients in Unit 4, I think it helps to say, oh, study goal number 14 is sort of the opposite of this. Or study goal 16 describes the problem, and study goal 18 describes the solutions. Sometimes you'll have sustainable versus less sustainable alternatives. Keep in mind when I call it good and bad, that's sort of tongue-in-cheek. I don't actually think that we should label any of these practices as absolutely good or absolutely bad. It's just to show the contrast between different terminology. But I am assuming that you have all these study goals with notes. And if you don't, I think you might get really burned by this exam. There's a lot of separate concepts and vocab. The last time we went through notes, did we discuss Steve Burr and rotational grazing?
Yes.
The last time we went through notes, did we discuss the whole list of environmental impacts of farming? Did we talk about the Dust Bowl?
really not.
I'm in 4.2. to number 16. I'm guessing that you know, when we're this close to the exam, basically if I say it, it's noteworthy. In number 16, and by the way, I fixed my laser pointer. Look, every time it works. Here's Jose. There's the
Where?
board. It just needed batteries. I'm dumb. Okay. So, erosion is not the same thing as desertification. Erosion is when you lose dirt. Dirt goes away. Usually carried by wind or by runoff on the surface. The most famous example was the Dust Bowl. Right before and leading into the Great Depression, mechanization was more common, tractors were cheap. There was a giant shift throughout the United States. Farmers stopped relying on livestock and manual labor and became much more proficient in the use of machinery, which had become cheap thanks to Henry Ford's assembly line construction concept. Because heavy machinery was cheap, everybody had it and everybody used it. And an entire agricultural region, our so-called breadbasket, went into heavy, heavy tillage right before a giant multi-year drought. Some parts of America's Corn Belt had a drought that lasted in the ballpark of 2 to 7 years in some cases. That's a long drought. Remember that most parts of that agricultural region did not have artificial irrigation. You depended on the rainfall to bring you your irrigation for farming. So in a drought, no rainfall, no irrigation, loose dirt, nothing growing in the loose dirt. Every time it's windy, there goes a little more dirt. I've heard conflicting estimates. If somebody wants to get the right number, I'll pay you extra credit. But I've heard that as much as 1 foot of the Middle's topsoil was deposited in the Gulf of Mexico. In other words, if you take a core sample of the bottom of the ocean right there, in the Gulf of Mexico, you find about a 1 foot layer of agricultural topsoil. The Dust Bowl was itself a historic and tragic period, but for us, the question is, how do we avoid erosion like that? What can we learn from those mistakes? Study goal number 18 described some ways to avoid erosion. We'll get to 18 in 1 minute, but I'd like to go in order, so the first thing I want to talk about is number 17. Oh, by the way, in the Dust Bowl, number 16, sorry to skip around, 16 Dust Bowl, there is evidence that the farmers contributed to the drought. Apparently, evaporation from the ground helps tip the clouds from condensation into precipitation. So if the clouds are at like 85% humidity, it won't rain. But if they get a little extra water vapor rising out of the ground, then that'll add enough water vapor to push the clouds into making rainfall. Does that make sense to everyone? The heavy tillage released all the soil's moisture very quickly. So after that, the Dust Bowl was left dry, and with no water to tip off the clouds, you could see the clouds going over, but they wouldn't drop any rain because the farms were themselves too dry to to contribute that extra little hit of moisture which would start the rainfall. So some people suggest that it was the farmer's fault that there was a big drought. This is highly speculative, just an interesting concept for you to know about, not exactly scientific evidence at this point. Okay. Number 17 is about the different layers of the soil. Remember that young soils are very simple. We've talked about ecological succession, so you remember that in primary succession, areas without soil will recover soil. And is that a fast process or a slow process? As a matter of fact, in many areas, it can be tens of thousands of years to recover soil. In young soils, you'll have your bedrock, because there's rock everywhere you are. Underneath you, far enough you go, you'll get rock. And as soon as there's been rainfall and some bits of weather, that rock will start to break up. So everywhere there's bedrock, everywhere there is the sea horizon above that. But the whole B horizon, E horizon, A horizon, and O horizon, subsoil, zone of leaching, topsoil, and mulch, those are accumulated organic material. It takes a lot of time. That's the part of the soil that takes those thousands of years. By the way, I'm assuming everyone did their homework. If you don't have your homework for 4.2, I think this is going to hurt a lot. Remember that the A horizon is also known as topsoil. A horizon is where you have all the humus and the nutrients and the soil food web. Grasslands have a lot of topsoil. In other words, a very thick A horizon. And in talking about soil, you should know that there are two basic philosophical foundations among different farmers. There's the Liebig style, which is demand-based understanding of soil. You sterilize the dirt, make sure there's nothing in there, and treat it as an empty sponge. So if a plant needs more nitrogen, you pour it out of a bottle. And if a plant needs more phosphorus, you pour it out of another bottle. The same way that some people regulate their diet by taking a bunch of pills. On the opposite side, the way that the more hippie, environmentally conscious people like me and your average organic farmer treat their soil is with an understanding of soil ecology, the idea of supporting a robust food web in the soil, because that food web will provide all the nutrients required to a plant if it's a healthy enough soil. I think I talked to you about the diagrams in the back wall that show the different types of soil food webs. So check this out. The secret of soil ecology is this, the mulch. If we're talking about the Sierra ecosystem, when you guys did your food web in Unit 2 or 3? 2? Unit 2, the food web in Unit 2? Whatever unit that was. Remember we did that food web with the big paper and you guys drew all the stupid arrows? Alright. Remember that it takes raw ingredients to feed the producers, and the producers feed the primary consumers, and primary consumers sow on a hill, right? Talked about that, I think? And I think I told you, if you see one black bear, you know that there's a whole lot of producers, because with the trophic inefficiency, it takes a lot of the foundation to provide for a few at the top. I think we talked about that too, right? Trophic inefficiencies in the food web? Yeah. Underground, the same thing is true. Except those raw ingredients have to come from somewhere. They come from the mulch. Remember that mulch is stuff that was alive but has died, like dead leaves, bark, dead birds, and their feathers, and the shed skin of the snake, and the shed skin of the cockroach. All that stuff that used to be alive, as it decomposes, will make the raw ingredients that support the food web underground. That food web is really complex. If you get a big handful, like a two-hand scoop of really good dirt, like really nice, rich forest soil, that can have hundreds of billions of individual bacteria. Some samples have been found with more than 1 trillion single bacteria in a double-handed scoop of soil. That's a lot of bacteria. That would be the productive stage. Or it could be technically the primary consumers. Then there's a whole separate diversity of protozoans and amoebas and nematodes and fungi. There was a really fun study in Science magazine that tried to characterize the complexity of soil ecology. And the guy said, look, we found a place that has good dirt. They went to the Pacific Northwest, I think, somewhere in Oregon or NorCal. And they said, in this two-handed sample, we have more than 1 trillion bacteria, tens of thousands of nematodes, tens of thousands of protozoans. They found 25 kilometers of fungi in each two-hand scoop. Think of all that. That's a lot of life going on in a little bit of dirt. And if you plant a seed in there, that seed's going to be stoked. Because with all that ecological chaos, there's always going to be a little nitrogen and a little phosphorus and a little potassium and whatever else that seed needs. The secret for healthy topsoil is that ecological diversity, because that ecological diversity equals nutrient chunk change. That's good for the plants. Is this making sense? Am I speaking English? I often say there's this like magic of good soil, which is really not magic at all. It's basic ecology. You guys understand. More things eating and pooping means more nutrient leftovers falling off the plate. Plants are scavenging those nutrients and that water for them to grow. And so if there's more organismal material switching hands, there's going to be more chunk change for the plants to grow in. The reason that mulch is so critical is those previously living things with sunlight and biological activity provide the raw ingredients to the soil food web. If you want to kill dirt, the best way to kill it is to scrape off the mulch. Because now there's no source of nutrients to fuel the food web. And the opposite is true. You want to have a really happy, healthy garden or a farm? Just mulch it. A diverse, complex mulch. And there's all your fertilizer right there. Sunlight, rainfall, bugs, poo, pee, all that stuff mixing in the water, all those bacteria, all that chaos. You had a warm-up sometime last week that said, why is it dirt under mulch is fluffier? And this is why. The mulch provides the raw ingredients to the food web, and with more food web, you've got more worms and more roly-polies and more ants and more termites that are working their way through the dirt. So watch me. More mulch equals more raw ingredients equals more soil food web, including the stuff you see that makes the dirt fluffy, like worms, or termites, or ants, or roly-polies. Today I was down in the garden. You guys know that we have a school garden that I teach the food production class in. And I had to move a couple of rocks that were holding down irrigation tape, drip tape, you know, like we talked about sustainable irrigation methods. And I moved the rock, and I realized this is exactly what my class needs to see. Because underneath the rock there was moisture, there was mulch, and it was swarming with bugs. I know that some people are grossed out by bugs, but the separate half of that gross out is that that's what makes the plants grow in our garden. Those bugs are doing work. They're cycling nutrients and providing chunk change to feed the plants. Okay. Anybody want to talk more about the soil food web and soil ecology? Cool. So, like I said, one study ago, that's what I meant to say. Like I was saying, one study goal ago. 16 describes erosion and the problems with erosion. 18 describes the alternatives. You'll have to tell me if these were in your book or not. I've edited my notes. I can't tell if these were in your book or not. I think we talked about contour plowing already because you saw that in the movie. Is it correct that we talked about contour plowing? Raise your hand if you've ever seen a topographical map, a topo map. If you imagine that this classroom is a farm with a large hill right in the middle, most farms are tilled in a grid because that's the cheapest, fastest, and most efficient way to run a tractor, is on a grid. And I'm sure you guys have driven by farms and seen those rows, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about? Now remember, if there's a hill right here, and I till in rows this way, that means I'm going to drive my tractor up the hill and then down the hill. So when it rains, those ruts from the tractor will become a gutter and take away the dirt. Tillage is a really good way to cause erosion because it makes the soil soft and fluffy, and if you till up and down a hill, then you've made gutters to drain all that water. Contour plowing, instead of going up and down the hill, would be more expensive, slower, but I would basically make a bunch of bullseye rings around the hill, staying at a constant elevation. The reason I asked about topo maps is, if you've seen a topo map, you know that those lines are called contour lines. It would be running the rototiller along the contour line. So if I take my tractor or my tiller and I make a circle, staying low all the way around, then when I get to the next side of the farm, the next row would be a little higher, all the way up here. And I'm running a smaller circle around that hill. And when I get to the very top of the hill, I just rototill a little target bullseye in the middle. What I've made are little miniature steps, like a terrace. Does that make sense? And so instead of having these ruts that become gutters, I till along the contours. Contour plowing is tilling along horizontal lines on a level. So that now when it rains, the water's not going to rush down a gutter, but instead will just sort of seep into each of the separate steps going up or down the hill. Does that make sense to everybody? Instead of gutters up and down the hill, you have steps to prevent runoff erosion. Reasonable? Yeah.
When I was in South America, they had a lot of those terrace farms. They seemed like really like the steps are huge.
Right.
Is that a good thing that they're that spread apart?
Well, Will asks about terracing, and then I'll get your question. Terracing is what you do on really steep hills so that the water doesn't just take away all the dirt. And on a really steep hill, terracing is the only way to farm.
Okay.
That's what you saw.
Okay.
Now imagine, instead of being really steep, if it's just very gradual, the terraces would be really subtle. But if you run the tractor that way, it's the same benefit. You keep the dirt from running away. It's just not strictly sharp-edged terraces.
Okay.
You know, the tractor's still going to have a little angle on it. But it'll just leave ruts that are all on the same level. So just like a terrace, it prevents runoff. It's a miniature version of terracing.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to like Vietnam or high elevation Peru, Ecuador, Chile, you see like big old terrace with like 10, 20-foot drop-offs. What we're talking about in contour plowing is way more subtle, half-inch, 2-inch variation on each.
So it's the same idea. Just
Same concept for the same reason, but at a smaller angle.
yeah.
Go, bro.
You mentioned the dripping of nutrients from like level to level. Is that?
Well, in many terraces, you mean when we're talking about soil or talking about terraces?
Like terraces, like how the steps up a hill, just like start and then like slowly nutrients move down to level.
Yeah, right. So in many terraces, the idea is the rainfall hits the top of the mountainside more, and so they're regulated to kind of waterfall down. So generally when farmers work on terraces, yes, it's true that they add more fertilizer at the top, knowing that that water will eventually trickle down to all the others. Contour plowing, I'm not aware of such a practice because, like I said, it's much more subtle. The water would be much more regularly distributed. There are other ways to keep down erosion too. I think your book talked about no-till agriculture or low-tillage agriculture. The idea that instead of breaking up the soil into really fine dirt, really fine dusty soil, that you would allow a mulch to develop and you would count on biological activity to mix the soil. The nice thing about no-till agriculture is usually you have to do a lot less weeding because you've got mulch to keep the weeds down and you're not mixing up the soil, so you're not re-watering all those weed seeds. No-till agriculture also creates a hard crust on top of the soil, so it's not as likely to wash away or to blow away in the wind. Strip and alley cropping are putting your crops in between rows of trees or rows of tall plants to provide wind protection. Some farmers will literally build rock walls to block the wind from taking away their dirt. So either you plant in strips, in alleys, or between wind protection rock walls. The last two ways to fight erosion are mulch, which will just cover up the dirt so it can't fly, or cover crop, which is living plants that anchor the soil, again, so the dirt can't fly away. Anybody want to ask me anything about number 18, different ways to prevent erosion? Yeah?
Wait, what's cover crop again?
Cover crop is plants you grow to literally cover the soil. They're not for food usually. Remember they talked about green manure, plants that you grow to add nutrients? We talked about nitrogen fixers. You know, if you just finished corn season and you're not going to plant potatoes for 2 months, you can leave your dirt out and let the wind take it. Or you could just plant some clover. That'll sprout in 5 days. And then at least you've got something holding down the soil.
So it's not while the crop is there, it's in the transition period.
Usually cover crop is the transition time between plantings, yeah. Anybody else want to ask me something in number 18? I'm pretty sure the bell rings right about now, doesn't it? Yeah. So I guess we'll pick up on number 19 tomorrow. And I have to warn you, we're going to really